Welcome, everyone. I am Jeff Lewis.
And I'm Tim Kowal. The California Appellate Law Podcast is a resource for trial and appellate attorneys. Both Jeff and I are appellate specialists, but we try to split our practices about evenly between trial and appellate courts, and we try to make this podcast a resource for trial and appellate attorneys so they can get some news or tips that they can use in their practice.
And a quick thank you to our sponsor. Our podcast is sponsored by CaseText. CaseText is a legal research tool that harnesses AI and a lightning-fast interface to help lawyers find case authority fast. I've been a subscriber since 2019, and I highly endorse the service. And listeners of our podcast will receive a 25% lifetime discount available to them if they sign up at casetext.com/CALP. That's casetext.com/CALP.
All right, and our next guest, Jeff, is someone that you and I talk about every now and then with some tips that we picked up off of his podcast. We have Ernie Svenson that we're glad to welcome to the show. Ernie, the attorney, as he's known on the internet, obtained his law degree in 1985 from Loyola University, and thereafter clerked for the United States District Judge Duplantis in the Eastern District of Louisiana. For 18 years, Ernie practiced law in a big law firm where he ultimately learned to harness technology in a way that his partners did not fully appreciate. He started a solo practice making strategic use of legal tech and now teaches other attorneys the value of systems thinking and technology in a law firm setting. He does this through his podcasts, his online community, and through online courses. Today, Ernie joins us from New Orleans. Ernie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tim and Jeff. It's great to be here.
Now, was there anything in that short introduction of you that I left out that our attorney listeners would find useful?
No, I don't think so. That pretty much covered the gamut.
Okay. All right, good. Well, Ernie, as I was telling Jeff, this is it's going to be a little bit of a different kind of conversation than we normally have. Jeff and I usually talk about legal cases or other news coming out of the court system here in California. But in our conversation today, we're going to be talking about how lawyers do their work and maybe some ways that they can do it better and even be happier doing it. I'm a subscriber to your podcast, Law Firm Autopilot, Ernie, and I listen to Law Firm Autopilot almost every week. Your podcast it's invaluable to me because it frequently reminds me of two things that are so essential to running a law practice, but are so easy to lose sight of in the hurly-burly of the week. And the first thing that I'm frequently reminded of listening to Law Firm Autopilot is that everything that can be delegated should be delegated. And the second thing that I'm reminded of is that you should be doing only those things that you can do. And another quote that came to mind when I was thinking about our conversation coming up is this quote from Aristotle that we are what we consistently do, and excellence is therefore not an act but a habit. and it's quite likely that you've quoted that same quote on your podcast, Ernie. And what I've gotten from listening to your podcast over the last couple of years is that you seem to believe that attorneys have something important to add to the world, but that too much of their energy is getting sucked up in pushing paper and in shiny objects. And so I wanted to get into why you think attorneys have something important to offer, what sort of thing that is, and how you came to realize that most of us are being kept from our full potential. So, Ernie, while you still practice law, what were the things that you enjoyed most and maybe some things that you didn't enjoy?
Well, I mean, I went to law school thinking that I would learn to think better. I was a philosophy major. I liked the idea of exploring truth and all that kind of stuff, but I liked the practicality of a law degree and what happens in litigation. And so I thought that would be something that would happen when I practiced law, and it was, but I mean, the undercurrent for me in the practice of law, the thing I liked the most was the strategic thinking that goes on there, and especially the part of the strategic thinking that involved having a deep understanding of human nature. My dad was a psychoanalyst, shrink guy. And so I grew up paying attention to the psychology part of things, but then there's strategy and logic and so forth. And so all those things come together, in lawsuits and in the practice of law. And that's what I enjoyed.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I was fine with human nature, and I think both Jeff and I do a lot of business litigation, and it tends to be family law issues always come up, even when you try to stay far away from it. There's always psychological issues at stake, and I think if someone was purely dollars and cents about it, they probably never litigate to begin with. From a certain standpoint,
Yeah,
there's always some kind of
these days.
there's always some kind of principle,
Expensive.
or there's some kind of psychological issue that I will not be trifled with, or something like that at play. So that's interesting. That you do have to have some deep understanding of human nature in order to fully appreciate this strange profession that we have here. Is there anything about practicing law that you miss?
I mean, well, I did litigation, and I think if I were to do it over again, I might explore transactional practice a bit more. But I liked litigation, and I liked the culmination of it. It's kind of like when they say people like having written a book, but they don't like writing it. I liked the culmination of a trial and seeing it all come to a head. And the 2 years I spent clerking in federal court, I got to see that happen a lot without having to do the preparation. So that was nice. But, if you do it yourself, there's something deeply satisfying at that moment when the jury is deciding the case, or the judge, and you get a ruling, all that work, and then you get a ruling. Of course, it's best if the ruling comes out the way you want it to, but, you learn either way. So yeah, I like that moment.
Hey, Ernie, speaking of your clerkship, you write a lot and you speak a lot about the impact that clerkship had on your career and how it was to be a lawyer. Can you share with our audience a bit about what you got out of that clerkship? And in particular, there's a story you write about the words that judge had you use as law clerks to open up the court for business each day.
Yeah, well, I mean, the overall three things I learned more about, by clerking for Judge Duplanche was, he used to tell me whenever he'd see me roll my eyes because we were doing something that I thought was like, why are we doing this? And he'd say, well, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And by that, he really meant it needs to be done exceptionally well. And so he didn't do anything that he didn't do exceptionally well. So therefore we did not do anything that we didn't half-ass anything. It was quite the opposite. And that was a good way to start out one's practice. He also taught me not to trust other people to tell you the truth or know the truth or have the best approach, even if they were lofty people that you would otherwise, tend to listen to. Verify everything for yourself. He used to always ask his clerks when we were talking about something, how do you know that? And that's really what he was always thinking when he dealt with people. How do you know that? How can I trust that what you're telling me is in fact the truth? That was a biggie. And then also be decisive. He was very decisive. He would rule from the bench in a bench trial, and that shocked the lawyers. He would say, okay, let's go. Wow. And he would just issue the ruling. And I think one time I asked him, I said, well, I don't see other judges doing that. It seems like you'd be better off kind of thinking about it a little bit. He goes, no, let me tell you what. He goes, nothing gets clearer the more I, let it sit there. He goes, now I will take something under advisement if I need to research something. And maybe sometimes I do need to think about it a little bit. Usually, and if you don't know, it's because you didn't prepare. So those were big lessons. But the two Oyez story, is one I tell a lot. And that's really an example of understanding human psychology. The judge could have said to us, hey, look, I'm really impatient. I don't like you wasting time. Or he could strike out the one Oyez on the card, and as he would put it sometimes, let the tom-toms beat, meaning let the message go out far and yonder, that this is the way it is. And there's something about, sometimes you need to be the one saying this is the way I want it done, and sometimes it's better if you let other people say it. And the story is, in my first week, I show up and the other law clerk's giving me, all the tips, telling me what I need to do. And there's a card on the table where we, stand when the court's being opened, and it has the Oyez, blah, 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 all that stuff. And he says, look, you have to memorize this, and you got a week to memorize it. And because the judge didn't want to see you holding the card. So you open up the court, other people have stuff to do. You're just standing there like a bump on a log, you're a clerk. So this is your job. But the third Oyez was stricken through. And I said, well, so do we say 3 or 2? He goes, no, just 2 Oyez. I said, well, what happened to the third one? He goes, well, the judge struck it out. And I said, why? And then he looked at me with this glare to make sure I understood he was not joking. And he said, because it saves time. So, I mean, I can imagine what happens one day. The judge, just hastily grabbed it and said, look, it's taking too long. And he struck through it. But, he knew that story was going to get repeated. So that story, along with others about how he wanted things done quickly and effectively, got transmitted. And by other people transmitting it, it was much more effective than if he had said it.
Yeah.
So that was a good lesson.
Interesting.
That's an interesting story. There's a lot of layers there in terms of there's a meta lesson about effectiveness and delegating that he was so concerned about saving time that he transmitted his instruction about saving time through a subordinate. Very crafty.
Yeah.
And I also like the comment. It sounded like a quote when you said that your judge said something to the effect of "Nothing gets clearer the longer I let it sit there."
Yeah, no, he did say that, and it was there's things like that he would say, and I'd say, well, I understand that sounds true, but is that true, and how is that true? And then I got to observe it. He had he would in his shirt pocket he carried an index card, and on that index card were notes for the day, but also was anything he had under advisement. So he didn't keep things under advisement, but if something was under advisement, it was on that note card. And so he was always keenly aware of what we owed him as far as work. And he, if it sat too long, he'd come and go, hey, where's that motion memo that you were going to write, whatever it was. And so you always felt under the gun. That was another one. That was a little subtle psychological ploy, which, probably wasn't purely for that purpose, but we always knew he knew exactly what was going on, and he knew because he didn't have a lot of things to keep track of.
Let's talk a little bit about, by way of prelude to talking about legal technology. Ernie, can you tell us a little bit about back when you were in big law, how your partners reacted when you tried to introduce legal tech, and some ways that maybe you can make some of the processes and things that were being done around the firm a little bit more efficient and effective by use of legal tech? I assume that if there's any kind of low cost way to make things more effective, they embraced it with open arms, didn't they?
Well, when I went to the firm, it was a small boutique firm, and the young partners who were part of the echelon of that firm that were the forward-thinking people, they did do some things that were advanced. Like smaller firms did not pay for a Lexis subscription because Westlaw wasn't in existence then. And they partnered up with Arthur Anderson in the building so that they could share that cost because they thought that was important. So there were things that they did that were forward thinking, but then over time, as technology became more dominant and it became not about one thing or two things, it became about looking at a lot of things. Then they started to kind of not be so tuned into it. And I could rattle off the list of things that the elder partner people rolled their eyes and said, no, we'll never do that. We'll never do voicemail. Well, really? You'll never do voicemail? Well, that's funny because some of our clients are using voicemail and they like it. And we'll never do voicemail. We'll never do email. We'll never do computers. I'll never have a computer on my desk, said every one of the main senior partners until they discovered that, they could use it for email and things. So it was always like say no first and then give in quietly later was kind of their approach. And once I noticed that was the pattern, I became impatient. I started looking for the third OA to strike out, but there wasn't such a thing. So I just had to figure things out myself. And that's what I kind of did. That's how I learned technology was I would just ask a lot of questions of the tech people in the firm and do as much of the things that they were doing as I could so I could learn it because I think everyone learns best by doing. So if you say no to something like, oh, no, that'll never work. Well, then, yeah, it's never going to work because you're not going to do it. And you're not going to understand how to do it. You're not going to understand what the real threats are and what the opportunities are. So I was willing to invest that time. And to me, that was a manifestation of if you're going to do something, if it's worth doing well. Well, if practicing law, is worth doing, it's worth doing well. That means updating your idea of what practicing law means. And while, lawyers shouldn't get bogged down in the drudgery of paper pushing or data processing, you should at least understand how it's done so that you can direct other people to do it.
Right. Yeah. No, that's surprising that there were attorneys who ever said, I'm never going to use a computer. I'm never going to use email. Then again, even today, I'm resistant to using text message. I tend to think, isn't email fast enough? How many nanoseconds are you saving by sending a text? But anyway, one of your other mantras on Law Firm Autopilot podcast that you say, I think daily, I think it's in your opening remarks, is to avoid the shiny objects. And so I think about that too, that there's always a ton of legal tech, and you could easily be overwhelmed by adopting, the newest legal tech and finding out whether it works for you, and then abandoning that, trying something new, or just overloading yourself and your staff with a lot of new bells and whistles that maybe you're not doing the trick. How do you? And so to the credit of the big firm foot draggers in terms of legal tech, they probably think that, well, we have systems that already work well for us. We're not going to reinvent the wheel with a bunch of shiny objects, so to speak. So how do you find that middle ground? How do you make sure that you are not violating the age-old maxim of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, while also not turning a blind eye to advancements that can really move your practice forward?
Yeah, I'm thinking as I prepare to answer this question, I'm thinking about a guy named Rory Sutherland, who's got a wonderful book called Alchemy, and he's a marketing guy, but he's an outside the box thinker. And so, because the answer is you shouldn't chase shiny objects, but how do you know they're shiny objects unless you chase some things that turn out to be shiny objects?
Right.
So in my case, I've chased a lot of shiny objects. So I have a really good intuition at this point for things that are, I can categorize them quickly. Like you can say, that's just something that's doing something different that, is already being done. And so you shouldn't switch gears to try something for a small incremental gain. So to me, if it's shiny and new, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to pan out or be useful. But unless your instincts are finely honed, you shouldn't be messing with that. And the reason I thought of Rory Gallagher is because, he's got this analogy that he calls, he says, like people say, well, is a dishwasher safe? And he said, well, this is a good instruction in how to think about things that you try that are new. He goes, the best way to find out something dishwasher safe is treat it as though it is. And after a year, you'll know it's either broken or it works, right? And that, it's so the outside the box thinking there is, you do need to try some shiny objects, but unless you're really skilled at it, it's better to find people who are doing that for you. And then if you can trust them, in my case, I hope people trust me and I can say, look, this is a shiny object. Don't do this. But it's more important for lawyers, I think, to forget about shiny objects. What are the things that have been around for a long time that they're still not using or doing, right? Like, because if you spend all your time maximizing the benefit of those things, then when you graduate from that, then start looking around for shiny objects. But until you've finished that, then don't even bother looking for some new thing like artificial intelligence, which is amazing. But, if you don't have systems for your practice, if you're not good at processing email, if you're not using automated scheduling, if you're not using outsourcing, don't mess with that.
Yeah, that's one of the things I find so valuable about your podcast, Ernie, is that you are trying out the shiny objects, so I don't have to personally try all of them out. You kind of try out all the shiny objects and report back. This one is worth your while. This one might work if if you satisfy, if you check these boxes, and these others, don't worry about them. So yeah, that's one thing I find invaluable. You're a Sherpa up the mountain of shiny objects.
Yes, I try to be, and I have the scars to prove it.
Well, you spoke of Rory. Was it Rory Gallagher's book, Alchemy?
Rory Sutherland.
Rory.
I might have said Gallagher because I think about the guitar player, but it's Rory Sutherland.
Okay, yeah, I put a question mark there. What other books have had a big impact on you that our listeners might pick up? I know you've had whole podcast episodes dedicated to this topic, and one earlier this year, I think, that I picked up and read at your recommendation that is a classic that I came to late was Peter Drucker's The Effective Executive. And I especially love the parable of the stone cutters in that book, where he talks about there are three men cutting stone, and one says, and they're each asked, "What are you doing?" And the first replies, "Well, I'm earning a living." And then he goes to the second guy, "Well, what are you doing?" "I'm becoming the best stone cutter in the county." Like, okay, that's a better response. And then he asks the third person, "What are you doing?" "I'm building a grand cathedral." That's the person who is who has his why. And so I love that advice. I wonder what other what else is at the top of your bookshelf.
I mean, I guess if I'm gonna narrow it down to one or two, I want those books that I would recommend to be very actionable. And so I would say the E-Myth book, but I don't think that's an actionable book, other than that it makes you aware if you read it and just get the big takeaway, which is that you should systematize your business. It's not written for lawyers per se, but in every business that's being run, you should look at it as though it's a franchise, or that you want to franchise it, because a franchised business is one that has, been through the ultimate dishwasher test, and things have been worked out to where they're super efficient. So you should try to be doing that. So if somebody asks me, what am I doing, when I'm cutting stone, I'd be saying, right, I'm trying to make my practice, so that I could sell it, not because I want to, but because I know that if that's my goal, everything else that I need to have happen is going to fall into place. Having said that, and having talked about Peter Drucker, who's the ultimate explainer of knowledge work, I think that there's a lot of different things that come into play in knowledge work, and knowledge work being intangible, and the systems not having been written down about how to do it in the modern world with computers. It's a very challenging thing. So if I had to pick one book, and I happen to have it right here, Michael Hyatt's Free to Focus book. This book is great because it touches on all the things that I recommend as being essential, like documenting systems. He talks about suite process in there. Using text expander as text automation. He talks about that, but he also talks about the strategies of how to be effective. And he's a devotee of Peter Drucker as well. So I think that book is the best one for people to check out.
Interesting. Yeah. Ernie, I met you at the beginning of the pandemic. And when I first met you, I was very skeptical about your thoughts about systems and how it could apply to law firms. I mean, a law firm is not McDonald's, and litigation is not a hamburger. But right. I've come around to thinking on this topic, and I've really learned to embrace it. Would you explain to our audience what it took me so long to understand about what systems thinking is, and how any lawyer could benefit from it?
Well, I think lawyers should be inherently drawn toward systems thinking, because, I mean, really all it is, it's looking at things and saying, okay, if this happens, then this also needs to happen. Or if this happens, then we go here. And that lawyers are doing that. Good lawyers are doing that instinctively. The trick with systems thinking is, as with all thinking, is if you want to improve it, it's best to write it down, right? Because when you can look at things that are written down, now you can work with them and see the flaws better, or come back to it later and refine it. So the thinking is improved by the writing, and the most nuts and bolts kind of systems thinking / writing is documenting procedures for how to do things, which is boring, but it's essential. And that's another thing I learned from Judge Duplanche. He had a book called the Bible. He was Catholic. He's Catholic, and he would name things. He loved the whole Catholic thing, so he would call the book the Bible. And that book was on my desk when I showed up to work the first day. And he never met me and said, "Hey, by the way, welcome to Section H. Let's talk about what you're supposed to do." That was all documented. And the first time he did it was over a period of 3 years, because he was very organized, and he was very systematic. And because of that, he knocked down his caseload from being the highest in the Eastern District to the lowest. And he kept it there because he had systems for everything, right? Now, not everything that was systematized was in the Bible, but anything that was routine, that was repetitive, that the clerks needed to do, that was in the Bible. And if there was a rare occasion where I said, hey, this happened. I don't know what to do. He goes, well, look in the Bible. I said, well, I did. It's not there. All right, well, then here's what we're going to do. And you're going to put it in the Bible. So that also instilled in me the idea, like, he wasn't going to do all of this work. He was delegating everything to somebody else. And even though he had high standards, he trusted that his system, which involved other people doing a lot of the work for him, was going to work, because he spent the least amount of time explaining anything. And I would say that the scratching through the Oyez was part of that system. Like, I'll just remove this word, and that's a ninja move that's going to get a lot of things done as well. So all of that is systems thinking to me.
Yeah, interesting. Before there was an internet or Wikipedia, he had this book that was like what would be a company wiki today, or a John Fisher type wiki of how to do it. So he didn't have to sit and explain over and over again to a new batch of law clerks how he does things in his courtroom.
Yeah.
And it had monumental things, and it had minutia. Like, I mean, as the even clerk or odd clerk, you had different responsibilities. That's common in a lot of courts. And, one of the clerks was responsible for keeping up the pocket parts in the books, because we had books then. And the other clerk, the equivalent task was water the plants. You know what I mean? And he had a green thumb, and he could water the plants, and he knew when they needed help, but he didn't want to do that. So he would explain, here's how often you need to water the plants. I was good at killing plants until I got to the section H. And then I realized, well, this is part of my job. I have a manual. Here's what I'm supposed to do. And I did it. And voila, it worked.
Yeah. No, that reminds me of a saying that I think the saying was, are you hunting antelope or field mice? And I think this was attributed to Newt Gingrich, actually. He noted that a lion can hunt field mice, but the yield doesn't justify the caloric output, So yeah, I could water the plants. Right. I could say, whatever, the Oyez, but my time is better spent doing other things. And even shaving off those, I think there's stories about, what are the, Formula One race cars. They rebuild these whole things, or the funny cars, whatever. Not the Formula One. They rebuild these things like every year, and they're like shaving off, just a 64th of an inch off of a nut, just to get that much more, that much less weight on the whole thing. It's like, that's another might be another aspect of systems thinking.
Well, I'll give you one that applies to appellate law, to lawyers writing, because I'd forgotten. He taught me a lot about writing, because everything that went out under his name, he would review with me, sitting next to me and scratching through the words and watching me scratch through them. And so watching him scratch through them. And one of them was, it'd say, under Louisiana law, blah, 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 whatever, something would happen. And he goes, no, we don't need that. He goes, in Louisiana, and then you would just state what the law is. And he goes, here's what people know. They know we're a court. They know we issue rulings. They know this is a diversity case, because we said in this diversity case, blah, 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 earlier. So all we need to say is in Louisiana, and that will be understood that we're talking about Louisiana diversity laws. Like, wow. It's like, but everybody else is putting all those other words in there repetitively. But to him, it wasn't just a problem of copying mindlessly, but it atrophies your ability to think when all you're doing is looking, I've seen that word before, I'm gonna leave that there. Like he hated that, and he beat that out of me.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, so Ernie, what are some examples of some small pieces of either systems or technology that any lawyer could employ at their firm after listening to today's podcast to improve their firm? Not a Notion size revamp of their whole firm, but a small bit of technology or systems thinking.
Yeah, and I just want to tag onto this question just to note that my team doesn't easily embrace technology, and so I'm always interested for gateway drugs, that will get tech-averse people to embrace technology.
Get us hooked, Ernie.
All right. Well, so gateway drugs and what is most effective for most people are kind of two different categories. So let me start with the easy to adopt thing that all lawyers should be working on. So I think email is a microcosm of all of the problems that come into systematizing a modern knowledge business. You're making a lot of decisions, you're collaborating with other people, you're delegating. It is like the hub. And most people, again, will look at email, oh yeah, I've got email, and then they stop thinking about what's going on inside of the email. So anything that can help you process email better is what you should be working on. Some of that involves filtering. So, a gateway drug there would be use SaneBox. SaneBox is this tool, and I don't know anybody who doesn't rave about how amazing it is if they needed it. Now, you can set up filtering on your own, and if you're happy, that's great. But if you want to set up a filtering system in email, it's tricky because then you have to start organizing and managing all that, and that takes caloric input in your cognitive processing. So SaneBox is artificial intelligence made simple. All you have to do is sign up for it, point it at your email inbox. It'll start holding emails and filtering some. And then you need to learn how to use it, but it's pretty easy to use. So SaneBox, for sure. Everybody should use that. But that's not the only thing that you need to do. Then you need to start thinking about other things. Text Expander, because anything that involves text automation is useful and important for lawyers. And because Text Expander works anywhere, including email, including Word, whatever, it works anywhere where characters appear by typing with a computer. And it works on Windows and it works on Mac. So that tool is a Swiss Army knife. And if you get good at using Text Expander, you're going to be way more efficient and you're going to output things more reliably, because none of us are going to be good at typing repetitive text. If I keep typing my email address, 1 out of 10 times I'm going to have a typo in there. Yeah. But I'll never have a typo with Text Expander. So it's not just that it saves time. It makes the text output more reliable.
And I think I started using Text Expander, and I find that is a gateway drug into systems thinking, because once you have a system for creating this type of email, then you think, and what goes along with creating that email is now my assistant needs to send out something else, and so you start thinking in terms of systems once you start using Text Expander.
Absolutely. Like that's it. And that trains you to think systematically, and it trains you to think systematically about automation, but it goes beyond automation, because in order to figure out what you can automate and how you can automate it, you have to be rigorous in a very, mathematically logical way about, if this happens, or if I want this to happen, can I do this? Yes. Let me see. Okay, great. Oh, wait, that didn't work. Let me try it this way. So that's kind of, it may feel like you're operating like a plumber and less like an architect, but, to be a good architect, you have to know some engineering and plumbing, right? So same thing applies with knowledge work.
Hey, Tim, if you want to get your team excited about using tech in terms of Text Expander, did you know they do these weekly and monthly reports comparing how many times your team has expanded things and how many minutes have been saved? It's always fun to go over those at weekly calendar meetings.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea.
That is a good idea.
Ernie, was there a third example? You covered SaneBox, you covered Text Expander. I think we cut you off. There was a third example of something?
Automated scheduling. Automated scheduling is a no-brainer. Every lawyer, every knowledge worker, everybody should be using automated scheduling. And I don't care what's Acuity, Calendly, those are the two biggies. But whatever it is, nobody should be going back and forth scheduling things. And the power of automated scheduling it has to be experienced firsthand for people to realize how useful it is.
Yeah, it's amazing. Let me tell you about the holy grail of the convergence of Text Expander and automatic scheduling. When somebody says, "Hey, Jeff, can we chat about something?" I type in 4 little keys, and they get an email back with a link saying, "Hey, yeah, let's chat. Here's my scheduling link below." It takes me 2 seconds, whereas it used to take me 10 minutes of the back and forth. And I can't do Tuesday. Can you do Thursday? Life-changing, just life-changing. I mean, there's a trade-off. You got to be religious about maintaining your calendar and putting things on there so people don't double book you. But it's fantastic.
Well, here, let me mention one confounder for me, which has been scheduling more than 2 people. So if I'm trying to schedule the 3 of us for this podcast, say, Calendly, at least the free version that I use doesn't allow that. I don't know if a paid version allows for that. You have to go up.
You got to upgrade, my man.
Okay.
That's why they have different tiers for people like you. They get you hooked on the one-to-one scheduling, and then it's fantastic.
They advertise that sort of thing, because I know I'll write the check if I know what I'm getting for it. But okay, so that's good to know.
Like, imagine this, being able to save like 2 or 3 spots on your calendar pending people selecting what they want. And then once they select it, the one spot gets locked in on everyone's calendar and the two other ones disappear. That's magic.
That's magic. That's great.
All right, Jeff, I'm going to let you schedule the podcast
then.
Yeah. Hey, Ernie, let me say this. I didn't learn anything about legal technology in law schools. When I went to law school, we were still, using the books to shepherdize cases. And what do you think law schools today should be teaching law students in terms of either automation, technology, or systems thinking?
Oh my God. Well, there's so many things that law schools should teach that they don't, that happened even before technology. Like, I think persuasion should be taught in law schools because it kind of comes into play a lot in the practice of law, and it's human nature stuff. But if we're going to focus only on technology, I would say, and of course I know this will never happen, but we're fantasizing, I realize. So I think database management, because I think that is what a database is organizing structured data. And then if it's not structured, well, then you get, text, and then you can start talking about artificial intelligence. But you can't start talking about those things until you understand how to manage structured data. And this, to me, is the reading, writing, and arithmeticing of the modern world. Like, we deal with data, right? And then data can become information if we organize it and filter it and do whatever. What tool do we use for that? A database. And databases are everywhere. Like, every software has a database in it. But a lot of lawyers don't even think about databases. They go, oh, well, use Word. If you ask them, what are the top 4 things you use? Word, Excel, PowerPoint, whatever. Every one of those has a database underlying it. So understanding what your options are about how to organize digital information, and then especially the structured part, because that's what's going to be easier to automate and more reliably automated, is structured data. And we are there. I mean, any data that's structured at this point can be automated, even if all of it doesn't reside in the same place. Like, that's how you use like tools like Zapier to connect Clio to, fill in the blank, Airtable, whatever. And all that happens because of a database. And understanding databases, I think that's huge.
Yeah, Jeff has gotten me into using Notion quite a bit, and I have really embraced Notion. And it is more of a true database. It actually, one of the stumbling blocks for me early on was to try to understand. Actually, the first thing that Jeff got me on was that was a database was Airtable, which creates these beautiful reports for, if you want to track how many client calls I'm getting in and how many of those converted into real clients, paying clients, and what are your billables this month and where do they come from, and it can churn all that data and create automated reports. It's really great, but for a while, it took me a long time to understand, how is this different from Excel? Because I can do reports like this in Excel. But there is something different. I haven't found a good way to explain quite how it's different. It's a relational database is the buzzword, but it's hard to explain exactly what that means. But once you get it, it's really next level thinking.
It's hard to explain. For me, like, when I started using this tool called CaseMap, because that was a way to organize litigation, and I did it. Try it for free for 30 days, and then I realized, like, wait a minute, this is like, before I used CaseMap, I was using WordPerfect, and I had a field in WordPerfect for date, and then a field for the name and the fact. Then I would sort the date field, and then I'd have all my stuff in a chronological order, right? And so a database can do that, but a database can also say, well, this fact has this name in it. That name is a witness over here in this witness table. And then there are these issues over here, and it's connected to these issues. And so you can now start saying, well, show me all the issues that this witness is related to, or show me all the documents this witness authored or received. And just clicking on a button and seeing all this immediately present itself. And that's for litigation. But that's, to me, the best way of quickly understanding it is, if you have a need to filter information that way in litigation, you should be using a database. And well, you do have a need, you just don't maybe know it, and you should be using a database.
That's right. It makes you so much more of a powerful advocate when you can lay your fingers easily on, well, these are the facts that relate to this issue. These are the documents that relate to this issue, rather than having to wade through your just entire your dumb Windows folder, or the folder on your desktop that has the entire list of documents for your case. It doesn't allow you to zoom into what are the actual documents that are important to this issue that I need to write a brief on right now.
Right. And it frees your brain up to focus on the things that the computer can't do, which is think about the strategy and all that other stuff. Because if you're burning calories trying to, find things or remember things, that's not good.
That's right.
Yeah. So, go ahead, Tim.
We're both way too polite. So many of our listeners, Ernie, are appellate attorneys, and they're dealing with large transcripts to read, and they have a longer time than trial attorneys to craft a brief. So they can spend copious amounts of time reading through these transcripts with a brief deadline, in the offing, 30, 60, 90 days down the road. What technology or systems do you advise do you have for our listeners for how to go through large amounts of transcripts? There used to be a tool, I think Lexis, I think it was similar to Case Map. I think it was called Text Map. That allowed you to go through deposition transcripts or other court transcripts and create kind of a relational database to, okay, here's another passage that relates to the issue of causation, and here's another passage that relates to the issue of liability, and so on. I wonder if is that kind of tool still around, or are there shinier objects since then?
Yeah, no, I think it is. I know Case Map is now cloud-based, and I can't imagine that they would have let go of that functionality, because it was so powerful. You would just highlight passages and then say, pump that into Case Map, and it would know, it would be able to then link out to the specific passage. It would pick up the name. So there's no way they got rid of that. That's too useful. But I mean, I could be wrong, but I doubt it. But in general, the idea of highlighting a transcript. So let's talk about like the simplest way to do it. The transcript's going to be a document that has words, and so it's going to have been generated by Word or WordPerfect. That means it's going to be expressible as a PDF, and it's better to be dealing with PDFs for doing this than Word or WordPerfect, because they're just kind of always slipping around and repaginating, and you don't want that. You want it locked in. So the transcript, if it's not in a PDF form, you make it a PDF form. But it will be. And then you go and you highlight all the areas in that PDF for the transcript. And what you should do is, if you're using Adobe Acrobat, and you should be, but you can do this in Kofax, which used to be called Nuance, and probably every other piece of PDF software. There's a way to say, when I select the text and highlight it in yellow or whatever color you want, I want you to copy that text over into the comments area, so that I can scroll through the comments area and see nothing but that text that I've selected. And you can even make notes on this text. That's the most embryonic but powerful way to deal with transcripts. But that's a PDF skill, and that's one of the things that I've been beating the drums about for a long time, because PDFs are digital paper. So the more skilled you are dealing with digital paper, the better off you are, because then you don't have to deal with regular paper, and PDFs can do things that regular paper can't do. So yeah, highlighting in a PDF is important. And if you're using Acrobat, you do have to go to the preferences and enable that functionality that says copy the text over. Why that's not the default setting, I don't know, but you have to enable that. So, do that immediately if you own Adobe Acrobat.
And speaking of Acrobat and PDFs, that's another biggie in terms of legal software. Is Acrobat still the go-to, or are there other shiny objects worth reaching for?
No, I mean, my theory on which of these to use, and I'm a Mac user, so there's this software called PDF Pen Pro, I think, and my California lawyer friend David Sparks, who is one of my North Stars of technology, he used that in his practice, I believe, for the most part, and he got away with it and he liked it. But my theory on PDFs and PDF software is, why don't you find the thing that's been the stalwart, and that's Acrobat. And yes, it's more expensive than Kofax. So if you're a Windows user and you don't want to pay the price for Acrobat, go find Kofax, and it does everything Acrobat does. But there are some specialized things, plugins, which most, 99% of lawyers are not going to ever use. But I just feel like I don't ever want to suddenly discover that I needed to use something different. Now, for me, if Kofax worked the way that it works on Windows on a Mac, I might be tempted because they're basically interchangeable. But Kofax is 1/3 the cost. They don't even offer subscription. So if you just want to own the software, that's the place to go. Some people ask me, I'll get asked this question, like, well, what do you think about Nitro? And then they'll give me all their favorite. And I go, look, if you're using it and it does everything you need it to do, don't ask my advice. I'm just talking to people who are looking for either validation of what they're already using or aren't using anything, in which case I would say get to a nunnery with PDF software like Acrobat or Kofax as soon as possible.
Interesting. Ernie, when I first met you, I thought, this is the guy who can explain to me how to use certain software. And it took me a couple months to realize you're not the guy who really explains how to use it, because you can find that anywhere on the internet. You're the guy who helps me understand which software I should be picking and how to best integrate that software into my firm. And so, I know there's some people who are so stuck on their choices, they'll never move off of what they currently use. Interesting.
Right. Right.
Hey, let me ask you, when I started practicing law, we would attach these blue backs, this cardboard, to the back of briefs, and we would hand the brief to a guy on a motorcycle. He'd go down to court and file it, hopefully by 4 p.m. And now we file briefs with PDFs into the cloud at 11:59 p.m. It's a totally different way of practicing law.
Right.
Where do you see legal technology going in the future? You attend these conferences and you follow the legal technology folks. Where do you see it going in the future?
Well, first off, I no longer think that going to conferences is the place where you're going to find what the next big thing necessarily is, because so much of it's a lot of shiny object noise. But I think the obvious one that anyone at these conferences would agree with is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, is explained in different ways, and people can start talking about robots taking over the world. And that's not what I'm talking about. My definition of it is that artificial intelligence is advanced pattern recognition with automated decision-making happening and also automated action taking. And it's something that transforms anything that involves complex patterns, and it's going to change anything that involves that whatsoever. So therefore, it is a hotbed. It's a huge opportunity in the law, because law is a hotbed of complex patterns, right?
Yeah.
But lawyers who aren't paying attention think, oh, those complex patterns, they'll never be dealt with lawyers. Well, the simple, they weren't good at predicting where the simple patterns were going to be taken over by computers. So I wouldn't trust them on the complex patterns. And so I would say the AI that is involved in writing, I know you, Jeff, have heard me talk about Jasper AI, which then became Jarvis AI, which became Jasper AI. That is a mind-blowing tool. And I don't use it because I want to write complex things. I would use it because I'm watching the robots learn how to write things. And while I'm always going to override them, just like Judge Duplanche overrode me, I'm not going to depend on them to do it all for me. But they can jumpstart the process really fast. And it's shocking what they can do. This is going to disrupt the law. It is already disrupting it, but so much of what we write and think about has complex patterns. And, structured data is easy to automate, but unstructured data with complex patterns is not easy. But that's what artificial intelligence is for. And it's going to disrupt the law.
Yeah. AI can actually start writing briefs. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I mean, it can start writing things so. All writing involves the crummy first draft. We know this, right? And nobody likes to write the crummy first draft. The other day, I had to write. I was writing about password management, and I wanted, because we did one of those things in the inner circle about Q&As, and somebody asked me about passwords, and they said they didn't use password managers. And I said, why not? And they told me their reasons. I said, okay, got to write something about this. But I decided to go into this Jarvis Jasper thing and see how much of it could write for me. And I gave it, because you give it a certain amount of text and point it in a certain direction. And it has this tool called boss mode. which if you click the button, it just starts writing. So I said, password managers can help you because they would, like, it was a sentence. I didn't even use the 600 characters. I was too lazy. And I said, well, let's see if this will work. Oh my God, did it work? And I just kept hitting keep writing, because it was like writing, intelligible sentences that I wasn't going to adopt them wholesale, but they were appearing out of the blue. And I was thinking, oh, that's great. That's an interesting idea. I should work with that. And then I would just take those parts and feed it back in and keep hitting next. And it was like a video game. And it got to a point where I realized I'm going to have to take over now and make it say what I wanted to say. But that part happened after about 30 seconds.
So is it taking this information? It's AI. It's writing sentences, and it's basing that off of what your voice dictation and something else as well. Is it plugged into the internet? Is it doing research in the background?
No, the way you get it started is you have to tell it, here's the title, like here's the the point of this. So let's say I said password managers can make your life easier. And then I give it a sentence or two describing kind of what I think is going on with that, which, by the way, all I did for that was I went to 1Password's website and said, well, what do they say about this? Copy, paste, and then hit go, and it started going. It was wild.
Well, that's incredible. That's a space to watch for sure. I wanted to ask you, my next question was going to be about outsourcing brief writing. As appellate attorneys, a big part of what we do is brief writing. It's my favorite part. I think probably 99% of appellate attorneys, it's their favorite part, if not 100%. It is, of course, the most time-consuming part. And so, sadly, every now and then, I just get jammed up, and I need to, give a brief to an associate to at least write the first
That's
draft.
the worst.
Right. And at times everyone else is busy, and I've gotten to thinking, well, I've got some other attorneys who do some contract work for me. Maybe I should have them do a first draft of an appellate brief. And I wondered, is that the right way to think about this? I don't know if AI is ready for prime time in drafting.
No, you're not going to use AI yet. But what I think, here's how I think of the structure in writing a brief. And I've written lots of briefs, and I've done lots of research. And one of the things that I was surprised by, I don't know how many other lawyers do this, but I did this, and I realized a lot of lawyers don't do this. When I would go to write a brief, I would do whatever research I needed to just get the lay of the land. And then I'd stop and I'd say, okay, I think I know what argument I have to make. And I think you should know that fairly quickly. And you guys probably know this, like right off the top of your head for a lot of things, right? So then you go, okay, this is my argument. If you write out your argument and say, now, person that you delegate this to, which I would go to, if somebody just says, well, I don't know where to go, I would go to Law Clerk Legal. That's a great place to find lawyers in the US, and say, okay, I want somebody to write my brief, but here I'm giving you direction. I'm saying these are what I think the arguments are. Obviously, if you find that that's not true, then tell me. But otherwise, you're just going and doing that grunt work of finding the cases that support whatever the arguments are, right? Like, that's not high-level thinking. Yeah. The high-level thinking is knowing which of those arguments to make and in what order to make them, and dealing with any of the nuances that come up because there's a sticky case, or, that's the high-level thinking. But that low-level stuff, I watched young associates come in and do that for me. And of course, the better they are in law school at writing, the more I could rely on them. But, you can find those people on the internet, and I would say just go to Law Clerk Legal to start looking if you don't know where to look.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. But it got me thinking of another, something else that I struggle with, and maybe Jeff, you can tell me if you struggle with this too. I call this the email hot potato. This is a struggle I have with delegating things. So I delegate something. I send an email to an assistant, or let's carry on with the example that you used about brief writing. Let's say I delegate it to someone at Law Clerk Legal. Here's the basic argument. I need you to do the grunt work of finding the authority that supports this argument. Then they're going to come back with me to me, say a day later, with here's what I found, and then it's probably going to sit in my inbox, because I thought, well, I thought it was going to take them a few more days to do this. So this is going to sit and languish in my inbox, and the whole process is going to stretch out because I'm not managing my inbox as expeditiously as I should, maybe.
Yeah.
Right. But we've exposed here that in your inbox, it wasn't an email problem. It's a decision-making problem because you're saying, I wasn't prepared to make a decision on this until a little bit later. So here's the decision tree. Do you have time to kick back with some additional feedback now so that person can start working on it again and you can go back to doing what you're doing? Or do you not have the time? If you don't have the time, well, you don't have the time, and you can say, okay, hey, I got your thing. Because I think every email that you get from somebody, and this is a text expander snippet I have, should say, hey, I got your email. I'm going to deal with it. And you can, create more sophistication of options of whatever you want to say. But basically, every email you get, you should be able to fire off a response that says, hey, I got your email. Because if you don't, that person's going to wonder if you got it. So that's baseline. But then, you work with what they gave you and you figure that out. But you're always going to be, the thing about systems is you need to be looking for patterns in your own behavior and other people's behavior and so forth. And if you're not good at finding those patterns, look over your shoulder because computers are coming up behind you who are going to be good at that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Hey, we've been talking a lot today about the operations side of running a law firm. I want to shift gears here for a little bit and talk about marketing because I've learned a lot about marketing from you. Appellate attorneys tend to be introverts. What's your best advice for introverts who need to market their services?
Well, I am an introvert, was an introvert, and we can talk about what that means. It doesn't mean I'm shy, but I definitely didn't like wasting time going around glad handing and going to networking events. I hated that. But you do have to do a couple of things in order to market your services. One, you have to do a good job because you're not going to be referable if people think you don't do a good job. So that's the obvious one, but that needs to be said. Then if you're good, then you want more people to know this. And what the problem with people, excuse me, and this is human nature, is they forget things. They forget you exist. Yeah. They forget you do that kind of work. They forget how good you are doing that kind of work. They forget how much you care about doing that kind of work. So you have to remind them. And the best way to remind them is to be in touch with them regularly, which, email is really great for. If you're going to have to send emails to a bunch of different people, that's very time consuming. But if you can send a generally useful email to a bunch of people that already know you once a month, that takes care of the job. So that's why I emphasize email marketing as the golden goose that everybody should be using to market their practices, regardless of whether they're introverts or not. But if you're an introvert, for sure, it's the easy way to do it.
Yeah, interesting. So we're not going to see an Ernie the Attorney TikTok channel anytime soon?
No, because to me, that's a shiny object. I mean, and here's why it's a shiny object. I'm already tapped out on using the channels that I have, and I'm probably not doing enough there to get, do what I need to do. So for me to take on TikTok means I'd have to learn the whole new system under TikTok. It's a new world. The algorithm's changing. I don't have time to play that game. Now, I know lawyers, and I've had one on my podcast who talked to me about how it helped her immigration practice. Yeah. Great. If it works for you, do it. Again, I'm not telling people, I'm not dogmatic. I'm just saying, if you pick one. If you're not doing any of them, then pick one and focus on that. For some lawyers, LinkedIn will be really good. For some, TikTok is great. I don't really know that. I wouldn't say Twitter is really good for almost anybody. So I wouldn't start with Twitter. Facebook could be, but LinkedIn and Facebook could be, and YouTube. Yeah. If you want to make videos, which is a whole nother level of sophistication.
Yeah. So what's a shiny object to you might not be a shiny object to someone else. That might be right in their wheelhouse.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, sometimes the shiny object is using too many of the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Don't pile on.
Hey, Ernie, you've been incredibly generous with your time today.
Yeah.
Tim and I want to thank you so much for being here and for all that you do for helping us lawyers adapt technology to our practices. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you.
I enjoyed having you guys in the group too.
Thank you, Ernie. And again, we want to thank our sponsor, Casetext, for sponsoring the podcast. Each week, we include links to cases that we discuss using Casetext, and listeners of the podcast can find a 25% lifetime discount available to them if they sign up at casetext.com/CALP. And to our audience, if you have suggestions for future episodes or topics or guests that we should include on the podcast, please email us at info@calpodcast.com. In our upcoming episodes, look for more tips for your legal practice.
See you next time.
You have just listened to the California Appellate Podcast, a discussion of timely trial tips and the latest cases and news coming from the California Court of Appeal and the California Supreme Court. For more information about the cases discussed in today's episode, our hosts, and other episodes, visit the California Appellate Law Podcast website at calpodcast.com. That's calpodcast.com. Thanks to Jonathan Caro for our intro music. Thank you for listening, and please join us again.